So today we're gonna talk about a very complicated concept that is called the vital principle. So when Fred, he's the one that defining like the subjects for the open lecture. So we try to do like lectures that are more related to help each other, but this lecture here will have more like a study type of like vibe. So I'm gonna ask you guys to interact a little more than what we typically do. I hope what I learn here, I'll try to translate a little bit to a more simplified language, because again, this is very complicated. And what I used to be able to do this lecture today was the Genesis from Kardec and also like the Spirits book. So both books have a very good information about the vital principle, and especially in the Genesis, you know, it's amazing. Like after a couple of years of studying Kardec, how much you start learning like with him and the way he thinks, and especially back in the 19th century, like the techniques and what he had available to be able to explore those concepts. It's pretty amazing. So like in the Genesis, he sets a ground before he talks about the vital principle that makes us to understand better what the vital principle is. So I'm going to try to do something similar. Of course, I'm not going to compare myself to Kardec, but I'm going to try to follow his way of teaching what is the vital principle. So before we talk about the vital principle itself, I want to ask you guys if anybody knows what the Big Bang Theory is. So most of you guys know, and I'm not talking about this one here, okay? I'm talking about the real Big Bang Theory. So, and you know, again, the reason why I'm bringing this to the table, it's because that's what Kardec used. Of course, back in the 1861, when he wrote the Genesis, the Big Bang Theory wasn't there yet. But he used very similar concepts. And then that's why I want to bring this, the idea of the Big Bang Theory. So for the ones that don't know what the Big Bang Theory is, the Big Bang Theory is what describes how, like materialistically speaking, or what the science explains of how we got here, right? Like how the universe has started and how we eventually got here. So unfortunately, I don't think you guys can see it here, but one day in the middle of the universe was the size of an atom. And this atom starts to expand in a crazy, like fast way. So in a small fraction of a second, the entire universe was the size of an atom. And then in this little fraction of a second, it was already the size of a grapefruit. And then it started expanding and expanding. And then back in that day, there weren't like atoms the way we know. There were like sparks, electrons, quarks, and some other subatomic particles in the universe. And they start like colliding one to each other, and this thing starts expanding and expanding. And then when you have like such a high transfer or a high expansion, you see like there's a high heat transfer. So like, especially, I'm not sure you guys probably seen like when you're opening up like CO2, or when you're dealing with anything that is compressed, when you open, you transfer heat and it creates like cold, or it could be the other way around, right? So it starts like this super hot environment that the temperature gets up to like almost like 1 billion degrees, right? So you get to 1 billion of degrees, and then those electrons and neutrons that were completely like separated, they start like forming atoms. Those atoms were hydrogen and helium atoms, and then eventually, after almost like 300,000 years after, those atoms start to form nebulas, and they start forming stars, right? So the stars start forming, and then when a star forms, what happens is there's a fusion between those atoms, and those very basic particles, which were like hydrogen and helium, they start forming other materials. So, and then eventually like the star becomes unstable and it explodes, and then when the star explodes, it gets to today, which is 13.7 billion years ago. And then that's where we are. So those stars explode, they form new planets, and that's where we are. And then you might think like, why are you bringing this here? Why does that have anything to do with Spiritism or the vital principle? Again, I'm going to get there, so just bear with me here. Just bringing a little bit of history too. So, oops. The Big Bang Theory was based upon a lot of like different scientists that, again, back when Kardec wrote his books, like those scientists weren't there. Like we had Newton, we had some other scientists that created some of the ideas that Kardec used. But then you see like those ideas that Kardec had corroborate with like the ideas of the Big Bang Theory. And then, but who the scientists that really set some ground in this Big Bang Theory were Albert Einstein. So when he created his theory of he actually created the theory in 1905, but in 1915 he actually published the theory of general relativity. And one of the main things that we take out of like the theory of relativity is the fact that Einstein proved that energy and matter are the same thing. But it's like energy is like, so if you guys remember, the equation is energy is equal to mass times the square of like a speed of light. So essentially he's just proving that energy and matter are very similar things. It's just like another state of energy. Matter is this, it's a different state of energy. Right, so that was the idea that he used here. And then I think he was a Russian scientist, his name was Alexander Friedman. He created equations based upon the theory of general relativity. And then then a little later in 1927, and this is, you guys will find funny here, this Catholic priest, he was the one that invented the Big Bang Theory. So the Big Bang Theory was created by a priest. And he used those equations to prove that everything that we know and like the idea of the start of the universe or the genesis of the universe from a scientific perspective started the way it is. So, you know, you guys can watch several like TED Talks and talk in much more detail about the Big Bang Theory. I just want to set some ground here to show you like that Kardec kind of used the same ideas, right? So then, on this next slide here, I took the chapter 10 of the Genesis, which is one of the books that Kardec has written. And if you guys never had a chance to read this book, I wouldn't say it is a book for someone that is starting in Spiritism to read, but it's a book after if you read already the Spirit's book, and if you're coming here, in a kind of like an often base, I would say like this book is like phenomenal, especially if you like science. It brings a lot of light into a lot of like different concepts that maybe the Spirit's book cannot bring in full detail, right? So I'm gonna ask someone to read. Hey, William, would you mind reading?
I wouldn't mind at all.
Yeah.
First formation of living beings. When there is a combination, the bodies composing it lose their characteristic properties, whilst the composition resulting from it possesses new ones, different from those of the first. It is thus, for example, that oxygen and hydrogen, which are invisible gases, being chemically combined, form water, which is liquid, solid, or vaporous, according to the temperature. Water, properly speaking, is no more oxygen and hydrogen, but a new body. This water decomposed, the two gases, becoming again free, recover their properties and are no more water. The same quantity of water can thus be decomposed and recomposed ad infinitum.
Yeah, so again, you might think you're reading like some scientist book from some general scientist, but this is Alan Kardec. So he was a very detailed person, and like when he created his not his theories, but when he put together the material that we use to learn Spiritism, he actually used very scientific terms and bases that he had back in his day. Right? So you can see here what he's saying is that the same idea that the Big Bang Theory that tells hydrogen and helium combined creating stars, and then those stars, like due to fusion, and that's what we are trying to simulate here on Earth now to generate infinite energy through fusion of hydrogen. We create new materials, which is what he's saying here. When there's a combination, the body's composing, you will lose their characteristic properties, and then resulting in a new element, right? This is exactly what he's saying. So, and that's what he mentions, that when we combine hydrogen and oxygen, we create water, which is nothing similar to what oxygen and hydrogen is. So he's just making this crazy comparison. And then one of the scientists that were already published material before Kardec was even alive was a very well-known scientist, and his name was Anthony Lavoisier, and he was the creator of the law of the conservation of mass. So anyone that did physics or engineering on university, or even like on your school, you probably heard this quote. And it's a very famous quote that says, in nature, nothing is created, nothing is lost, everything changes. Which means that everything that we have here already existed back in the Big Bang day. So the only thing we're doing is really like modifying that to a different state. So this is the same idea that Kardec is trying to share, and also that the Big Bang Theory brings us to the table, which means in reality that we are made of stardust. So we are actually stardust. Every single one of us carry properties that we could find in stars, and we are just like in a different form, right? So the stars, they create those chemical elements through fusion, and they are the same elements that we find here on Earth. So like gold, iron, carbon, everything you can imagine was created in the stars, and then through pressure, force, and heat, those elements combine, and they create different types of elements, right? So and then this matter in the universe is constantly recycled with the formation of stars, and then we have a supernova event. So supernova is when a star explodes, like those materials get recycled, and then they become new type of things. So hydrogen, oxygen combining, forming water, right? So Kardec was so picky and so detailed that he actually put this table here on the Genesis. So, and again, unfortunately, I don't know if you guys can see here in details, but he's showing a table where he has, over here we have like carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and nitrogen. And then he takes those elements, when you combine them in a certain percentage, so if you combine 42% of like carbon with almost 7% of hydrogen and 50% of oxygen, you actually create sugarcane. Then if we change the proportion, so if we have 37% of carbon, 6.78% of hydrogen, 56% of oxygen, you actually form grape sugar. So he's showing that the same kind of elements will form different types of materials depending on the concentration and how you manipulate. And he even talks that we can only got to this knowledge due to chemistry, right? So when we start analyzing molecules in chemistry is when science realized things were made of the same things. And again, why does that have anything to do with Spiritism? So the idea here, and the idea of the Genesis itself, it's to explain us how we got here, how everything has started, right? So what he's showing us here is the fact that he even uses the terms inorganic, and organic thing. So the idea of inorganic things are anything that doesn't have any sort of like life. So minerals or water or gases or anything, this is what he describes as an inorganic material, right? And then organic is something that has some sort of or some form of life. And this form of life, it could be plants, animals, humans. We are actually animals too, but anything that has some sort of like life. So then
What's the last thing, the last substance on the list there?
Oh, it's called fibrin.
What's fibrin?
I don't know. So the one above it's fat, but fibrin, I don't know if anyone is.
Fibrin has a lot of nitrogen. I'm just wondering what that is. Maybe some sort of protein, some fiber.
Yeah, I honestly hair.
Muscle fiber.
Muscle
fibers
fiber?
of the muscle maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the one above it is fat. So yeah, I don't know. But anyhow, so and there's I'm not sure if you guys can read this here. So thus no special body enters into the composition of animals and plants, which is also not found in the mineral kingdom. So let's step back a little bit and think now. So if you're made of the same kind of materials that the mineral world has, how come like we're here and a rock cannot talk to us? You know, have you guys ever thought about that? How come like we have the same composition of a lot of like those minerals and stuff? Like why we are here talking, we are intelligent, and the minerals they don't have the capability.
Some people talk to crystals.
Yeah.
But they don't talk back, right?
Yeah, but the crystals don't talk back. Yeah. So that's the whole idea that Kardec brings, and yeah, and then again, just the same thing here. One can conclude that the body of the first living beings were formed as the first stones. So what this chapter of the Genesis tells us is that everything that was formed, organic and inorganic, was formed the same way, right? And again, Kardec, like back in his day, he didn't have the knowledge that we have today in regards to the Big Bang Theory, right? So the Big Bang Theory, like I showed in the previous slide, was this idea was published in 1927, but only I think in 2009 we actually could prove that the theory was real, based on because now we have telescopes. And with telescopes, when we look into the sky, we actually see the past. I'm not sure if you guys know that, but every time you see the light from the sun, that light took 8 minutes from the sun to get to here. So you're actually seeing happen 8 minutes ago. So if we look into the universe, and then when using those telescopes, especially the Hubble telescope, when we look into the sky and we look into like supernovas, we're actually looking into the past because those are billion light years ago, billion light years far from us. So it's this idea that was only proven again in 2009. So it's really, really close to us. So that's why, and it's really impressive when I start reading this chapter. I was like, it gave me chills because I was like, how come Kardec, back in 1857 when he published the Spirits book, he had those ideas already. So it's pretty amazing. So let's play a game here, okay? So those are again, our body is made of like 65% of oxygen, 18.5% of carbon, 9.5% of hydrogen, nitrogen. So you guys can see here. This is and I was talking to my wife. She's a science teacher. She was saying like she's teaching that to her kids. It was kind of funny that kind of got the same slide. So we're composed of those minerals. So do you guys think that if I take a box, let's say you weigh like 200 pounds, right? So we take 200 pounds worth of everything here, and we divide in the exact same proportion that we have here: 65% of oxygen, 18.5% of carbon. We put this everything in a box and we put it away. Do you guys think after a couple of years that would become me or somebody else? What do you guys think?
No, absolutely not.
So why?
Because it doesn't have this principle that you're going to talk about.
Yeah.
What does
So
100
exactly.
pounds of oxygen look like?
What's that?
What does 100 pounds of oxygen look like?
So
How
actually,
big would that be?
so it's funny because when I saw this the first time, I was like, 65% of oxygen. How come we're made of 65% of oxygen? But remember, we're actually made of water, and oxygen is part. It's like every atom of oxygen has 8 times more weight than hydrogen. So that's why we're made of 65%.
It's not a number proportion, it is a mass proportion.
It is a mass proportion, yeah. So one atom of oxygen weighs 8 times more than hydrogen. So, and since you're made mostly out of water, that's how we come up with the numbers here. So that's the idea. So the reason why minerals and other very basic elements, they don't have a life, or they're not able to speak and act, basically because they lack in this thing that we call the vital principle, right? Or the vital fluid. And when we start talking about the vital fluid, then you might think like, where does this come from, right? Like, what is the vital fluid? Is it something that we can actually measure? So I put this picture together here, and it's actually, again, on the Spirits book and also on the Genesis. So it tells that the vital principle is formed from this thing that we call the universal cosmic fluid, which is something that God has created. So it derivates from the same sort of element that creates matter, but it's a completely different element. And there's even like a quote here, and my iPad died. Let me see if I can find it here.
You think the universal cosmic fluid is like the Holy Spirit?
No, that's it's a completely different thing. There's nothing related to the Holy Spirit. So and I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that, but this is a complete. That's why it's so hard to understand, because it's so abstract and so out of reach to us that it's really hard for us to understand, like in details, how do you turn this universal cosmic fluid into matter and this vital principle, right? So, but the idea of what the spirits say, and that's why I want to try to find the quote here. Give me 1 second, because hold on. Chapter 4. Yeah. So, question 63, it says, is the vital principle present in a specific agent, or is it a property of organized matter? Simply put, is it an effect or a cause? Right? So that's the question that Kardec asked the spirits. And then the spirits respond, it's both. Life is an effect produced by an agent acting on matter. Right? Again, rocks cannot talk because they don't have this agent acting on matter. That's why they don't have a life per se. Without matter, this agent is not life itself. So the vital principle is not life itself. Just as matter cannot live without this agent. It gives life to everything being absorbed by it, right? And then the next question asks what you kind of asked. So, spirit and matter are two essential elements of the universe. Is the vital principle a third? And then the spirits answer, there is no question that it is necessary for the makeup of the universe, but its source is a special variation of the universal matter, which is also what we also call like the universal cosmic fluid. For you, it is an element like oxygen and hydrogen, which are not primordial elements because everything derives from the same foundation. So what he mentions here, and then if you guys look in the Genesis, he says it's one of the principal elements. So that's why you guys can see here, I put some other balls here at the bottom, because there are other things that we don't understand, like what it is. And the spirits, since they didn't answer that, my understanding is that we wouldn't be able to understand what those other elements are. So that's why they said vital principle is one of like the elements that are derived from the universal cosmic fluid. So, and then we get to a point that what is life? How can we define life, right? So remember like that box that I mentioned to you guys before? So if we get that box and we apply this vital principle to a box, maybe it will become something that we can tell that is life, right? So I made an animation here. So we combine matter with the vital principle, then eventually it becomes life. So life is a consequence of applying the vital principle to matter. That's the idea that the spirits kind of like allude to us. So, and then they actually use Kardec uses an example in the Genesis that it was kind of hard for me to understand at the beginning. So I thought this example was actually a little better. But and he used that example because, again, we're in the 19th century. So what he said was that life is like when you have a wheel and this wheel is spinning, right? The wheel is spinning, you have like friction to the ground. So this heat that is being generated, that's life. Imagine if we take out the motion that was making that, or the element that was acting upon the wheel to create the motion. That it's like if we take away the vital principle, what is left is just like a dull wheel, and then also like the carbon, because when you're spinning your wheel, especially like a wood wheel into the ground, and it's generating heat, you also have carbon. So you actually the result. So if you don't have like the that agent in there, it's something without life. It's just like a so you're turning that energy into carbon and other things that will decompose and start new elements, right, or new things. So like I brought this example here, which for us it's a little easier to understand. So imagine that I have this light here and I take the batteries off. So how can you use that light without the batteries? There's nothing you can do with the light without a battery, right? So the vital principle is that energy that is inside of that battery that turns on the light. So the life and death concept is when we run out of those batteries. So when the light runs out of battery, then we essentially we die. Like especially I'm talking about our presence here on Earth, right? I'm not talking about like the life in the sense of like an immortal life. I'm talking about like the physical life here on Earth.
Do pure spirits or spirits, when they are disincarnated, do they have vital principle as well, or is this just for the incarnated?
Yeah. So the question is, do the pure spirits or the spirits have a vital principle? The answer is yes, but it's different. So like there's a question in the spirits book that actually mentions about that. So what is the difference between the vital principle that plants have or animals have and humans and spirits? So those are still what we call like the vital principle, but they are different depending what you are and where you are. So and then they even said like, do different planets with different living creatures have different types of vital principle? And the answer is yes. So like the vital principle that we have here on Earth might be different than vital principle that we have as a spirit. So they come from like the same base, which is the universal cosmic fluid, but each, depending where you are and which state you are, you depend on different types of like vital principle. So, and then what differentiates us from like now we're not comparing ourselves anymore to like a mineral or comparing ourselves into like a plant or some sort of animal, right? So what differentiates us from like a plant? So if the plant has vital principle, how come we're different, right? So, and then this is in the introduction of the Spirits book. So, so there are three things in man, which are the body or the material being, which is analog to animals, and it's animated by the same vital principle. So at this point, we're still similar to plants in a way. Then what differentiates us from like plants is what we call the soul, or the immaterial being, which is our spirit that is incarnated in our body, which essentially is our consciousness, right? This is what we are. So we actually, what you guys are seeing here, it's my Claudio's current state. And even Claudio is not me, it's what I am right now. But what I really am is my soul or my consciousness, right? And then we also have what we call the pure spirit, which is what links our soul or a spirit to our body, right? And again, what makes the machine to turn is the vital principle. So, so I made another animation here that, you know, hopefully will make you guys understand a little better. So we have our spirit, and we have matter, which is our body, right? So we unite our spirit with matter, and then the vital principle is what creates the human life. So when we run out of batteries, that's when we disincarnate, right? So that's one of the ideas that, and then this chapter also covers a little bit of that, which is, you know, what causes death, right? Why do you guys think like people die? And then Kardec asks that to the spirits, and so what is the cause of death of organic beings? And it's the exhaustion of their bodily organs, right? And then what becomes of the matter and the vital principle of organic beings after their death? So the inert matter is decomposed, meaning it will form new things and it will be used by new organisms. So our bodies will be used by different. It will become part of like the environment here, and it serves to form other bodies. And the vital principle returns to the general mass of the universal fluid. So when he's talking about that, he's talking about like this earthly vital principle. Right? So that's the idea of death. So death is really like when we run out of this vital principle. And then there are even like some books that talk about the idea that, well, the Spiritism talks about that the moment of the death is when we cut this cord that links our perispirit to our body, and that's when we really disconnect from here, and that's when we die, which is also linked with the lack of like the vital principle. And then when we the other thing that is being covered by some of those chapters is really like the distinction between intelligence and instinct. Because now, okay, so we know we are not a mineral, we know we're not a plant, and with our spirit or our consciousness becomes something that we call intelligence, instinct, right? So animals and even plants, they have instincts, right? So, and most of the animals, they're actually driven by instinct. You know, one can tell animals don't have souls, but if you, and then there's a lot of debate like within the Spiritism itself, but for me, it's more a matter of like semantics. But so what we call soul, soul only applies for human beings, and for animals, they have a different type of like spirit. But anyhow, animals are driven by instinct, and we were also like driven by instinct, right? So the first question here, in terms of instinct, do you guys think instinct is a form of intelligence by any chance? Does any?
It's a rudimentary kind of intelligence.
Yeah. That's exactly it. So instinct, it is a form of intelligence, and we use our instinct is not always bad. It's actually like, in a lot of cases, it saved us. Like if you look back when we were like, how's it called, like, the cavemen. We were driven by instinct, and that preserved us like to be here today.
We still are, like in a car crash. If you don't have instinct, like that would not.
Yeah, and so if you read the part that talks about instinct here, it's actually like, let me read this real quick since we have time. Yeah, so it's question. Oh yeah, it's right here. So the first question that I want to show here. So is intelligence an attribute of the vital principle? Does anybody believes that? Interaction, people. Come on. No?
Intelligence is our consciousness. It's
Yeah.
from our soul.
From ourselves, yeah.
Exactly. So no, for the plants alive, they don't think. They're plants, but they don't think. They have vital principle, but they don't have consciousness. So they have only organic life. Intelligence and matter are completely independent of one another. So yeah, and what he calls animalized matter can only be rendered intelligent, but it's union with the spirit, right? And then so the second question, which was I was trying to get, is instinct independent of intelligence? What do you guys think? Do you guys think we have like a separate thing for instinct and intelligence, or do you think they're kind of like blended together? Together. Ajunia?
Oh.
No, not precisely so. For its suspicion, it is a sort of like intelligence, right? It comes with us. Instinct is an unreasoned intelligence, meaning like typically like when you're gonna argue with someone, in most of the cases you're gonna think about, should I do that or not, right? Instinct, you don't think about it, you just do it, right? So if you're like Nadia was saying, like if you are in an accident, like in a car accident, your body, but the way it is, it will like contract into like a form to preserve yourself. So that's not you thinking to do that. It's the way your body acts. Or like if you put fear
is something that you instinctively avoids you to get in trouble or to avoid some situations in your life, right? That you act.
Yeah, or
fear.
imagine like there's somebody cooking a barbecue, right? So the barbecue is like really hot. So I'm like completely distracted and thinking to something. And then I put my hands close to the barbecue. If I touch the barbecue, instinctively I take my hands off. So
It doesn't even get your brain. When it is just a reflex, it just gets your spine so that the response is quicker.
It's sensorial, right?
Yes, you don't think about it. It
Yeah.
really just gets to your spine and then you respond.
So
like
it's
the reptile brain, that the brain stem, the bottom part of the brain is where the instincts and the involuntary movements come from.
yeah, I think like she said, like in some cases our instinct is triggered not in our brains, even like in our spinal cord. So the spinal cord is it's a reaction that it needs to be so fast that if we get to your brain, process and come back, it wouldn't be enough for you to not burn your hand, right? So, but anyhow, it is a form of intelligence. And then, so is it possible to establish a line of demarcation between instinct and intelligence? So to define precisely where the one ends and the other begins. So do you guys think that the more we become intelligent, the less we have instincts? Do you guys believe on that?
No, I think you develop your instinct that will help you be more
Yep.
intelligent.
That's exactly right. No, they often blend into one another, but the actions which belong to instinct and those belong to intelligence are easily distinguished, right? Again, you know, like when you're acting by instinct and when you stop and think about something, you're really thinking. You're not like acting on instinct, right? And a lot of people, they blame, oh yeah, I have like really strong instincts, or like they'll do something dumb and they'll say, oh yeah, that was my instinct, but in reality, it's maybe not. So, and then there's also a question that I couldn't fit here. Is it correct to say that instinctive faculties taper as intellectual faculties develop? Meaning, as we evolve as a human beings, like, do we really stop having those like instinctual like reactions? And then it says no. Instinct always exists, but humans dismiss it. Instinct, like reason, may lead us in the right direction. It always guides us, and sometimes even more surely than reason. It never goes astray. So why is the reason not always a foolproof guide? So instinct sometimes lead you to like a bad decision, right? It would be if you were not corrupt by poor education, pride, and selfishness. Instinct does not reason. Reason provides freedom of choice, and gives the individuals free will. So, so those chapters are kind of like short, so I don't want to along the lecture today. But the idea was really to bring like this background that Kardec used in terms of like science and bringing like what is the vital principle. And again, every time I read Kardec, I become like more like a bigger fan of him, because it's so amazing like how much theory and how thorough he was when he wrote those books, given the information he had at the time. So, for the lecture today, I have used the Genesis and the Spirits book. Again, the Spirits book, if you're just starting to study Spiritism, is the first book that you want to read. And it has more than 1,000 answers, and the way it was done, like Kardec, and you guys, we're probably going to do like an introduction of the Spirits book lecture sometime soon, I guess. But it shows like Kardec even writes like why he decided to pursue like and write this book. And then the Genesis is really like the name of the Genesis. I don't know if you can see here. It says Genesis, the miracles and predictions according to Spiritism. So that's the real name of the Genesis. A lot of people don't know that. But it talks about how the universe was formed from like a spiritist perspective, right? Like how things were formed, how humans were formed, what kind of races populated the earth, and it's very, very interesting. And before we finish here, I found this message here from Emmanuel. This book, Fonte Viva. I don't know if there's a version in English. So, would you mind reading that?
Yes. It's imperative that we prepare ourselves to acquire the most noble qualities of intelligence and heart, sublimating imperishable individuality. Education and sanctification, work and fraternity are duties for all creatures. Self-improvement is an ordinary obligation. Let us seek zealously the elevation of ourselves, styling our presence, whatever it may be, with the blessings of service to all, and as soon as we are integrated into the work in the whole, within the personal and ceaseless action in the good, the Highness will unveil us more enlightened paths for ascension.
So, I think the message here, let's use the opportunity that we have here on this existing life to, signal our presence, right? Whatever we are. Because, those studies, they help us to understand, like, why we are here. The only reason why we study Spiritism is really to understand why we are here, like, what is our real mission? And our real mission is really to signal our presence and create blessings that could service to all. So I think like that was a message that I tried to tie here to the presentation. And then it says, as soon as we are integrated into this worth endeavor, the Highness will unveil us of more enlightened paths for ascension. So that's the message that I'd like you guys to take home, and even for me too. So I hope you guys enjoyed the lecture, and now we're gonna proceed with the pass.